Hi there, welcome to this session on business analysis. My name is Ian Gotts. I've been around the Salesforce ecosystem a while. So three numbers for you. 10 years in consulting, 20 years as a Salesforce customer and partner, and 30 years in business analysis. In fact, I drew my first process map as an Accenture consultant in 1986. So I really want to talk to you about the importance of business analysis. Really excited that there's a certification that Salesforce recognizes the importance of doing good business analysis. But why is it important? Here's a picture of me sailing a hydrofoiling moth. And one of the things that we used to say in competitive racing is, the faster you go, the further you go in the wrong direction. And I think there's a risk with Salesforce that it's so easy to customize. It's so easy to go, I just add an object, just add a flow, that we're not necessarily building what the end users really need. We may build what they think they want, but not what they really need. And business analysis is all about making sure that we really drill in and find out what really is required to generate real value for the business users first time. So one of the phrases we've got is all about, you need to build the right thing. And only when you understand what you're going to be building, then you can build it right. So business analysis is build the right thing. Build the thing right is DevOps. And it's very easy to think you're doing business analysis well, but there are so many steps between someone's idea and actually getting it to the development team. If you miss any of those steps, if you break any of those items in that chain, then you're not going to be building what's really required. And therefore, every step in the chain is critically important. And what I want to do is I'm going to spend some time talking to Adrian King. He's one of the co-founders, the COO of Elements.Cloud. He steeped in business analysis for years and years. And I want to get his perspective on how you build systems really, really well by doing really good business analysis. So first of all, Adrian, can you give me your take on business analysis? Is it easy, hard? I mean, lots of people are talking about it. What's your perspective?
At Elements, our vision is to help people build the right thing on top of the Salesforce platform, but actually far more than that. Now, our actual vision statement is to be the solution that people all over the world use to build the right things faster. And there's actually some really important words in that. And the critical thing is about building the right thing. I've got decades now, unfortunately, of experience in the software industry. And it never fails to amaze me that a lot of focus goes on building the thing right. All of the software engineering techniques to deliver great software. And still a depressingly little amount of effort goes into making sure that what actually is being built is actually what will deliver real business value. And the issue that, probably the best way to sum it up is that there is one word which is so dangerous in the software, but particularly the Salesforce ecosystem, and that's the word just. I see it all the time. I see it in our own business. Somebody in the business comes to us and goes, could you just build X? And it's so easy to go, great, I'll go and build X for you. The problem is that actually the business doesn't need X. It needs something often far more complex, subtle. The problem is actually different. And I've sort of done back of the envelope type calculations, and it's probably $1 trillion problem every year in the industry of things being built that are just not what the business needs. Sometimes this is quite minor, it's just not quite there and people get frustrated. And sometimes it can be an unmitigated disaster where actually the project fails altogether, or sometimes the project seems to deliver, but nobody uses the output. And actually, you've actually delivered, you've implemented on time, but there's no time to value, because if there's no value, it's infinite. You're never ever going to get the value for the 10,000, 100,000, million, 10 million, whatever is the budget to build that capability. There is no return on that. And our focus here at Elements is to help people build the right thing. And at one level, it's hard to build the right thing. But the other way of looking at it is it's actually not that hard at all, in that there are some systematic things which you really need to do to go and build the right thing. Implementing them in a business, getting them to actually work, getting to work systematically can be very, very challenging. And every business who's building something actually goes through some form of process to get to the point of this is what we're going to build. And that ranges from being marginally suboptimal in a great business doing it to catastrophically suboptimal in many businesses. And even in the same business, it can range between that because often the business itself isn't doing that process in a systematic or consistent way. And I think about even our own behaviours. We try within elements with our own business to be pretty disciplined about the way we get to the point of we're actually now going to hand over to the engineering function to build something. We try at Elements to systematically execute the process by which we go and build the right thing for the business. But even there, sometimes it's just too easy to hear a request from the business, go, yeah, we can do that, and dive in. And that word just, we just dive in and try. The majority of times when we succumb to that, we just hit so many problems. Because even the simplest change, somebody just wants a new pick list value on a field, it seems like a trivial thing to do. The implications of that on the system can be profound. It can affect reports, it can affect dashboards. Actually, the automations depend on values there. They now don't know about that value. So that very, very simplistic change has catastrophic downstream consequences. But actually, it's even more profound than that. Why did the business want that new pick list value?
So I think I heard you say that this is easy because there are some well-proven processes or steps that you need to go through. So can you take me through step by step? I'll pause after each of the steps and I can dig into a bit more detail for the audience to bring it to life for them.
There are 4 fundamental stages that we go through. And I say it's far more complex than that in practice. But the first one is businesses do not give us requirements. I know there's nobody in any business, when I've spoken to the business analysis, to the product owners, the people who are responsible for actually delivering capability on the technology platforms, businesses don't give requirements, they actually give wishes. They come up with, we would like X, Y, Z. The reality is they haven't really thought about it. It's what's forefront of their mind right at this point. The first thing you've actually got to do is drill into what the real goal, what the real aspiration that the business has, what problem and pain are they trying to solve. And we use the 5 whys technique. Very simple. Ask why. Drill through. When you get that answer, drill through to the next why until you really have got to the point where you've bottomed out what the real pain is. In many cases, you'll discover that actually you already have functionality to support what the users want to do. The real business problem, they just didn't know about it, they hadn't been trained on it. Cheapest fix of all is realising that you don't have to do anything. And there are many times when that's the case, but it would have been so easy just to go and add a new pick list value. So, the first thing is to genuinely get to what goals does the business really need?
So the first thing you said was it's about capturing the requirements, the true business requirements, not the wish lists. And it's also not about creating user stories. A business requirement is not the piece of work to change Salesforce, it's understanding the business requirements. And we'll use that later on in user acceptance testing. If I think about the business analysis certification, a couple of things that they pull out in terms of you needing to know. One is the difference between a requirement and a user story. The second is about tracking requirements in a version-controlled repository. So this is not a Word document. This is not an email list. This is actually a formal way of tracking those requirements through a change cycle. Now, here's an example of what that might look like. This happens to be in Elements. But again, here are the requirements. Here are the links to all the supporting documentation associated with that requirement. It's more than just a line item in a spreadsheet. Great. Okay, so that's step 1. So what next, Adrian?
The first thing is to genuinely get to what goals does the business really need? The next stage is to do what many people would consider to be sort of almost traditional business analysis, actually taking those requirements and drilling through into understanding what the new end-to-end target process is going to be and what the data that's supporting that process is. And that's a very symbiotic process of understand. I always start, I'm a very data person, but understand the basic shape of the data and the problem you're trying to solve. And then work on what is the business process going to look like to support the new way the business wants to operate. And As you're going through the process, you'll discover, oh, there's some data we need which we haven't modelled. And then if you're looking at the data, you're going, where do we actually create that? Nowhere in our process does that data just clearly just magically appears from somewhere. Well, it doesn't. Somewhere that data has to come from, and you've probably missed the process. Well, if you've missed the process, how are you ever going to build the software to actually ever get that data in until way down the line, where suddenly you haven't budgeted for it, you haven't planned for it, it's a rush. Maybe you discover once you've got into production that suddenly you assumed that this data was going to be there, with potentially very, very bad consequences for running the business. So building this to be target operating model is absolutely fundamental. In building that model, you will clarify the requirements, you'll often identify new requirements. It's a very, very iterative process going through and getting to the point where you really understand that target operating model.
Okay, Adrian, what you just talked about sounds like the most difficult part of business analysis. It's iterative, you're trying to validate the requirements, you're mapping business processes, you're understanding the data model. So it's iterative, you're going around, you may identify new requirements, you may kill requirements because they're not valid business requirements. What I see quite a lot is people going, oh yes, I know what a business process is. And if you look at the Trailhead courses, the Trailhead module on business process mapping, it's quite specific. There's a standard called UPN, Universal Process Notation. It's been used for 20 plus years in the industry. I just want to take you through a few examples of what a process is not, because that's what I see. So this is not a process. Okay, UPN is very specific about the way you map processes. And the reason it's specific is because it works. Even though it seems quite simple, actually, when you dig into it, actually, there's a lot of subtlety, a lot of nuances that are hidden within the way that UPN is drawn out. So don't be fooled by the simplicity. So this example here, these aren't processes; they're just words. This is actually no better because they're not activities starting with verbs. You've got lines between them, but I've got no accuracy. What's on the line? I need to know what the handoffs are. Here's a flowchart. A flowchart, lots of people use them, but UPN, if you want to think about it a different way, UPN is flowcharts on steroids or upgraded. So we have a look at that same flowchart that I've got on screen now. That flowchart we've got on screen now has got like 19 boxes. There's text without lines, so I'm not quite sure how it works. The swim lanes means that we've got to position the boxes in certain places to make sure that it works. Here is the equivalent information as a UPN diagram. Half the boxes, more information. And actually, this next screen shows you some of the key aspects of UPN, so the first one is you've got resources, attach them, who does something, that replaces the swim lanes. You've got drill down, so you can get into more detail. You've got text on lines. You've got attachments, so you can attach, this process step is because of this requirement, or it touches this metadata item, or it's actually this training content. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but if there is a Trailhead module that talks about UPN and process mapping, I would recommend, if you haven't done that module, go and do that. If you're still using flowcharts, if you're still drawing 4 boxes with marketing, sales, service on there, then you've broken the chain. You won't get the outcomes that you expect and deserve because you're not using the process to validate the requirements, to really challenge the business into what they need.
The next stage is once you know how you want to work, and by the way, at this point, it's technology agnostic. You're really trying to work out what the business needs and how it's going to operate. The reality, of course, is you will, however much you go with technology agnostic, the fact that particular technologies give you opportunities to do things will affect how the process works. So, yes, solution, you don't want to be doing solution design, but it will affect how you think about the target operating model. The next stage is probably, to me, they're all fundamentally important, but the next stage is the bit which I think gives real solidity to building what the right thing for business, which is we go through the end-to-end process, and every single activity we look at to go, do we need to change something against what we do today? And if we do, that generates a new user story or a new work item for what have we got to do. And we were doing a change in our own business recently. There were, the end-to-end process maybe had been 70 or 80 activity boxes, and we literally systematically went through every single one to understand what we had to do differently. And we probably came up with 15 or 16 distinct changes at various points to make this process work from how it worked today. The great thing about doing that systematically is now we have a consistent and complete set of changes. So hopefully we've got the target operating model right at this point, because if you haven't, you'll have missed stuff out. You won't necessarily get all the changes. But the interesting, as you go through and go, we need to do this, even that triggers, have we thought about that? And again, it's iterative. We go back and we potentially modify the target operating model. But the critical issue is we've now got a list of all of the things which we need to implement to, if we implemented these, we could now run the business the way we now want to run it in the future. I see so many places where stories, the changes just seem to emerge from somewhere. And it could be that somebody's done it before, a consulting firm has done this before, and they bring their list of changes which they expect you to do. And you as the client look and go, yeah, I don't think we do that, we'll scrub that one. And they then go and ask, they go around and ask the users what they want. And they'll tell them we want X, and they put it into the list of things to be built. The problem with that is that you do not end up with a complete or consistent set of changes. And so many times the problem with the delivered system is it doesn't support the complete end-to-end process, because you haven't gone through the discipline of understanding how the business needs to operate to be able to support those changes. So by running through that process, we've now got a complete set of what changes we have to do, but we don't actually understand what the impact of those changes will be on the landscape, the technology landscape we've got. And in many ways, even the operating model landscape. How big is the operational change? How big is the training going to be? What are the cultural changes of this? So, but the thing which we probably focus most on is the changes at a technology level. So the ability to start then going through and start mapping what changes in the technology do we think are going to be affected to sports. It's not a full solution design, but it's actually just starting to work out. If we go and do this, we're going to need to change that flow in Salesforce. This Apex class is going to be affected. We're going to need to add 3 new fields to this object. We need a new object. By going and starting to build this manifest of the changes to the metadata in Salesforce, but it could also be integrations. It could be into other systems that we need to touch. You know, even though we're relatively small compared to some of the organisations we're supporting out there, every change touches, our accounting system. We need to do something, even if it's just adding a new product into the chart of accounts. You've got to get it done. If you don't do it, it will fail. So by building out that manifest, we can then start to go through and understand the impact of that change. And the really important thing is we're going to go and change. We realise we need to go and change the flow. What does that flow impact? And there's a cascade of impact. And we've got there's one field that we planned to change some time ago, where we realised that actually this thing was probably going to affect this one change, which we thought was trivial on one field in Salesforce, was going to affect, I think it was 18 flows, an Apex class, multiple other things. What felt like an hour's work actually turned into probably it was going to be 4 weeks of work. Now, the really interesting thing at that is we went back to the business and said, you want that, but the cost of doing this is going to be this, which means we can't do all the other things you want. Can we now prioritise whether or not this is really important? Because actually this is now running into actually approaching tens of thousands of dollars worth of work to deliver something. So is this genuinely of value to the business? Or is there some other project, some other change which we could implement for the business, which adds far more value at a much lower cost? So actually, it's really, really important that effectively you're treating this as a product management type role at this point, of determining the value that the business is going to get from the work you're going to do. And we regularly effectively kill projects at this point. We've put quite a lot of effort into understanding, but it is not worth the implementation cost versus us doing something else. We've now got a fully scoped set of understood stories with a cost of impact, the risk. We also do a risk assessment at the same point as part of the impact is, if we were to implement this, is it low risk? Are we going to, if we get it wrong, do we hurt the operation of the business? Actually, is this high risk? Are we actually potentially if this goes wrong for the business, Are we going to end up potentially having significant consequences that we're going to have to remediate? And actually, the complexity and the risk of executing the change, building the change, also drives down in the engineering side what pathway we go to building it as well. So we do a lot of work up front.
Okay, so let me just repeat what I think I've heard. You have a user story which has been generated off the back of the requirements, but until you understand the implication of the systems, which is why we need to build that metadata dictionary, we need to understand the dependencies, we can't put a risk associated with a user story. We don't understand the impact that user story will have on our systems. And the scale now of applications, the complexity of Salesforce implementations means doing that analysis manually is impossible. I mean, from an Elements perspective, we've analyzed 15 billion metadata items. We're analyzing orgs with hundreds of objects, hundreds of flows, thousands of dependencies. You can't do that manually. No one should expect to. Great. So now we've actually got an understanding of the user stories and the risk. Then what?
The final stage we go through is actually planning the releases of this. It's quite possible now we understand the shape, that in conversations with the business, we can split this up into multiple phases. And we do this quite regularly, where we'll go to the business and go, right, you've got this entirety of what you want, but there is an increment of value we can give you, which is a portion of it, and then we can roll this out, another bit out and another bit out. The great thing about that is that we can actually get value to the customers much, much faster that way. We can also phase it in. Quite often, they may not need this capability for some time down the line. Also, by getting the first phase out, we really know whether or not we've done the analysis correctly before we invest in subsequent phases. Okay. At that point, we're ready to actually pass this into the engineering group, my admins and developers, to go and actually turn this into, realize it on primarily the Salesforce platform, but actually the changes involve our integration technologies to other platforms as well. But the process we've gone through there feels quite heavyweight, but actually we've been very systematic, and with the tools, it's actually relatively easy, and I use the word relative, but it is relatively easy to actually go through that process and deliver a genuinely properly scoped set of changes that can be implemented. The great thing about doing that is the build goes really quickly. When we actually did elements on elements, we dramatically reduced the time to build and the rework time. As best as we could see, we had significantly reduced the overall time to value. It felt harder work. We were doing a lot more work up front. We were challenging the business a lot more. We were engaging the business more. But the overall time and cost to deliver value to the business was, I'm actually going to use the word dramatically reduced. It was between 50, we were taking, between about 50% and 100% reducing down, so to half the time to actually deliver the results. Not necessarily to the first release, but to the time it took to when the business was genuinely using it and getting value from the change. And I always come back to it's time to value, not time to implement. That's actually where people should be focused. So what I'm going to come back to now, Elements' vision is to help people build the right thing so they can build it right. And the really important word after that is faster.
You make a compelling case for let's do more business analysis, build will happen faster. But most importantly, what I've heard here is that you'll build the right thing, which means that the users get what they really need to actually improve their business. Time to value versus time to implementation. An interesting concept there. Time to value is, am I getting more value out of Salesforce more quickly versus time to implementation, which is, yes, I built it really quickly. So time to value is the important thing there. And business analysis is fundamental to that. One thing you didn't talk about, which I hear a lot, is user adoption increases if you do decent business analysis. Now, I know there's pressure from the business to go, why are you asking us all this question? Just get on and build it. I know I need to pick this value, just get on and do it. And you need to resist that. Vanessa Grant and Andrew Russo did a great session at Dreamforce talking about just say no. And business analysis is a really nice way of actually saying no to the business users and at the same time helping them. So there are some great resources available to you as business analysts. There's a list here. And thank you so much for joining us for this session.